Hi, my name is Paddy O'Boyle. I'm the Director of Business Development for ICT at Dublin City University, and I've been asked to give a short presentation of how DCU, or any university for that matter, can help small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, in Ireland. A quick summary of the presentation. Step 1. I'm going to explain how I believe DCU can help your business. I'm going to give a little bit of context of historically why companies of all sizes work with universities. So I know through this workshop the focus is on how companies can work with third parties through different partnerships. I'm going to build the case for why that should be DCU or universities in general. I'm then going to go into the specifics of DCU's expertise and the funding mechanisms that are available here in Ireland. And hopefully that'll convince you that working with DCU is a good idea. And if you accept that, then the next stage is to talk about the practicalities of actually making that a reality. Most activities in DCU can be mapped into three major buckets, of which one's of direct relevance to the discussion today. Universities are involved in teaching. There are lots of lecturers, lots of students, postgraduates and undergraduates, and while they're a really good source of employees and a very important role for society, they're outside the scope of the discussion today. We're also involved in early stage research, and I characterize that as really smart people, experts in the field, trying to come up with major breakthroughs that often take cumulatively many years. Instead, the focus today is on what I'm calling applied research, which is smart people, technologies, innovative ideas that lead to new products and new services in the market. So within applied research, I've broken it up into two parts. One I've called inside out and the other outside in. In inside out, we're really helping to fund smart researchers within DCU to develop their technologies that usually end up in one of two categories. They either end up as new spin-outs, new startup companies, or the technology's licensed to an existing company. The focus today is on the outside-in model, and that's very simple. A company comes to us with a problem or opportunity, and we put a team together and get funding through an industry collaboration that addresses and fixes that specific problem or opportunity. This is just a very simple graphic to explain how it works. So companies we deal with often have R&D expertise in-house, but by doing a collaborative research project, they're able to tap into DCU's research and development expertise, which is often broader than what's in a company and often deeper too. And in the same way, most companies we deal with have R&D budgets, but because there's very generous subsidies available, somewhere between 50 to 80% of the cost of the project, you can make your R&D euros go further through your collaborative research project. And that's really important, especially since a lot of projects are riskiest at this early stage. In this section, I want to give you a little bit of reassurance because there are companies all over the world who have worked and are working with universities and have benefited from their expertise. And I want to make the case through just one simple but I think very powerful case study. The case study I borrowed from this person here. He's the ex-chairman of Intel. He's Craig Barrett. And at an event I was at, he asked the audience who they thought were successful technology companies. And the usual suspects appeared: Google, Facebook, and Microsoft, and he chose Microsoft. And then he asked the audience how much they thought Microsoft spent annually on R&D. So I did the most recent research, and it turns out that Microsoft are the 5th largest spender in R&D, and annually it's something like 15 billion euros or dollars per year from 2018. He then asked the same audience what they thought the major technology developments that had a negative impact on Microsoft's business over the years, technologies that Microsoft missed out on. The first one was the Mosaic browser in 1992. Microsoft had to play catch up with their Explorer browser. Then there was the Linux operating system in 1996 that had a major impact on their OS business. The Google search engine. Microsoft do have a search engine called Bing, but it's a very small market share compared to Google. And then finally Facebook. Microsoft missed out on the whole social media revolution. And he then made the point that the Mosaic browser came from the University of Illinois, the Linux operating system came from the University of Helsinki, Google originated in Stanford University, and then Facebook, it was created on campus at Harvard University. And by this he simply tried to illustrate that universities are a really good source of innovation, and he was encouraging the companies in the audience, many of which were large multinationals and US and Irish based, that they really need to look at universities as a good source of new ideas and innovation. So just to reinforce the point that Craig Barrett made, these huge multinational companies who spend billions of dollars per year on their own research and development still feel compelled to work with universities and companies outside their company boundaries. And they're embracing what we loosely call the open innovation model, where at all stages, at research, at development, and even bringing products to market, they work actively with third parties. And that has been our experience. Even as DCU, a relatively small university in the world, we work with Microsoft, we have worked with Disney, we have worked with Google, Intel, and lots of really impressive blue chip companies. So the simple point is, if it works for large companies, surely it should also work for local, small and medium-sized companies too. And I suppose it could be argued that if you're a big multinational and you have deep pockets and lots of people to manage these relationships, that it's relatively easy to work with universities. And in fairness, there is an element of truth in that. But to be really honest, in Ireland, the government and the funding agents have been incredibly progressive in making it easy for small companies to work with universities. There are generous funds available to companies of all sizes. You do not need to be a multinational. The Irish university system, the research and development system, continues to get really good investment. We continue to increase the number of PhDs and postdocs, and they've invested in technology transfer offices, people like me, to try and make the process simple and easy to work. And in truth, there are lots of flexible engagement models. Here's the evidence on the right hand side. I can't remember if it's from 1 or 2 years ago, but Knowledge Transfer Ireland counted up and found that there were 1,371 collaborative research agreements between businesses, Irish-based businesses, and universities. Up to this point, I've been building the case for why a company of any size would want to work with a university. And there are, in my opinion, lots of examples of where that has happened and it's been successful. Assuming you're convinced, or at least you'll consider the option, then we need to get into the specifics of What's the unique expertise that DCU has that could be leveraged, and what are the funding mechanisms that are available to companies in Ireland? I'm responsible for information and communications technologies in DCU, and loosely speaking that's all software. And I took all the unique expertise and all the different schools and departments and simplified it into 9 areas. I'm not going to go through each area in any detail. This is just to demonstrate the strength and depth of the research capability in DCU. Data analytics, network technologies, right through to sports and health. Behind each of these categories is a bunch of really talented people, senior professors, often at the top of their field, lots of smart researchers and postdocs and software engineers, all of which expertise is available for you as a company to leverage. As I've mentioned before, in Ireland we're very fortunate because we have some very generous funding mechanisms for companies to work with universities, and I'm going to give you a very simple overview of those and focus down on what I would consider the 1 or 2 most popular mechanisms that DCU has used to work with local companies. What I've outlined here are what I think are the key funding mechanisms. There are more, and at a later date we can go into detail on some of the other mechanisms, but these are the major ones in our experience. So it goes from top to bottom, the smallest amount of money through to the largest amount. The Irish Research Council allow you as a company to sponsor a PhD or a postdoc at roughly 1/3 of the cost, and that's for one individual to work in your company. For a PhD it could be 4 years, for a postdoc it could be 1 or 2 years. And that goes through right down to the bottom, which is Horizon 2020, where you as a company could be part of a consortium that bids for and could win multi-million euro contracts from the European Union, multi-year, very generous funding mechanism. And then in the middle you have what I consider the sweet spot of funding mechanisms in Ireland. It's Enterprise Ireland's Innovation Partnership Programme, and the equivalent is Science Foundation Ireland's Targeted Project Programme. That's where I'm going to focus the rest of the presentation. The mechanism is incredibly simple. You, the company, come to the university or the funding agent with an idea or a new market opportunity or a problem to solve. We map the right university expertise to solve that problem, and Enterprise Ireland or Science Foundation Ireland provide the funding, the match funding or the subsidies to make that a reality. To illustrate the process, I think a case study helps bring it alive. Let's use the example of an Enterprise Ireland Innovation Partnership project, which has 80% funding from EI to DCU. If we use the example of a project that will last for a year for 2 people, either 2 postdocs or a postdoc and a research assistant, it's not untypical for that to cost around €100,000 for the 2 people to be dedicated to your project for 1 year. The cost to the company, because of the 80-20 funding, is €20,000. And just to give you a comparison, if that were to be done as a contract research project, which is often typical with large multinationals, that could cost as much as €200,000, that specific project. In terms of the process, it's incredibly streamlined and non-bureaucratic. In phase 1, the research team and the company work together to help define the project. That's then translated over into a very simple application form that's available online. Most of the writing of the application is done by DCU, with the business justification inserted by the company. Enterprise Ireland move extremely fast on projects of this nature. The delay between submission and approval is typically a month, and we've enjoyed incredibly high success rates in applications. And then the project can start as quickly as possible. Often it's only gated by being able to hire the right staff or the company being able to supervise the project. So the principle on which we work is very simple. In return for the generous state funding, the technology is licensed exclusively to the company. We negotiate commercial terms at the start, and any funding that returns back to the university through a successful project is reinvested in DCU research. And we agree all those principles up front, and it really is a very straightforward. In DCU, I've done lots and lots of projects with lots and lots of companies. As they say, this is not our first rodeo. Through these interactions, you start to see patterns emerge, characteristics of the companies we deal with. The best ones are companies who have an established business and they're looking to the university to enhance that business, either add a new product or service or solve a problem. Engaging with really early stage companies we found is a little bit more problematic because they're 100% focused on trying to get a business up and running. So why do companies want to work with people like universities like DCU? Well, the obvious one is you want access to expertise. And within that, you may want access to expertise only for a fixed period. So a simple illustration of that would be a user interface designer. You probably only need that person for the duration of the project or a part of the project, and you wouldn't have enough work for a specialist of that nature in your business full time. What I've also found is lots of companies have grand intentions of doing new projects, but most of their resources are spent maintaining their existing business. And when you do a new project, there is risk. So spending $100,000 on a new project is probably less palatable than if you could spend $20,000. So having the access to the funding mitigates that risk. And then for some companies, working with the university, there is credibility. What to avoid? Well, this would be like any project, any internal project. Universities don't want to do stuff that's too easy or too difficult. The project sort of self-police. So you do not want to go to a university to say develop an app. You don't want to go to a university to enhance your website. What you want is some research element where we have expertise that's unique. Where we've had problems in the past is where some companies don't have any R&D expertise in-house, nor do they have anybody to manage a project. It makes it much more difficult to transfer the learnings and expertise. And then the usual things, like any internal project, if you don't define what you want out of the project, then it's very easy to fail. So the discipline of filling in an application form and writing down objectively the goals and deliverables makes that more likely to be successful. I'm going to finish the presentation by reinforcing a few of the points I've made earlier. Here's an interesting one called Joy's Law that states that no matter who you are, most of the smartest people work for someone else. So it was coined by Bill Joy, who was the founder of Sun Microsystems, and it was a criticism of Microsoft and them trying to control the whole ecosystem. It simply reinforces the point that even as big multinationals, they acknowledged that there were lots and lots of smart people in the field that they were working in outside the company, and they needed smart ways to actually tap into that ecosystem. And that's really the discussion today, is how can you as a company tap into expertise that's outside your company in DCU and other universities. This is just a thought experiment that I described for the healthily paranoid, just to be provocative. So every company, virtually every company I've talked to, has a list of R&D projects that they haven't got round to doing. And I suppose my question to you is, what if you knew your competitor had exactly the same list and exactly the same challenges? but they decided to take action. They acknowledged that most of their people will be working full-time on their current business, so they came to DCU. They defined a project pretty quickly and they submitted a very simple application. They benefited from the almost universal approval rate for project submissions. They're now working with a couple of talented postdocs in DCU on a defined project. They're paying what I would estimate as 10% of the full economic cost of actually doing a project, and they're planning to launch a product to compete with you in a year. So I only offer that as a sort of a suggestion of maybe now is the time to consider at least having discussions with the likes of DCU about how they can help your business. I'll finish on a positive note. There are smart people in DCU and in universities in general who can help your business. Funding is readily available for the right projects, and people like me and Invent, the technology transfer office of DCU, are here to make the process simple.